bird watching, bird studying, and talking about birds pretty much all his life. Is that right, Bob?
Absolutely right.
And he worked for he has a master's degree in biology, and then for 30 years he worked at Powder Mill, banding birds, studying birds, publishing articles about birds, etc. And then for the last 15 years he has been with the National Aviary, and the amount of education and advocacy and just teaching people about conservation that Bob has done is probably unmatched. So there's a lot more I could say. Actually, I'm going to say one thing. If you haven't been to saltwater owl banding in Sewickley down in Pittsburgh, make a trip one day. It usually happens in the winter and it's pretty cold, but it's so worth it. My daughter and I went there one winter and it was absolutely awesome. So and that's another program that Bob runs. So without further ado, Bob, please go ahead and thank you for
Thank you, Miriam. And that the owl banding spring season starts on Tuesday. So it'll be on Tuesday and Saturday nights in
worth
the,
it.
the rest of February and then all of March, if anyone is interested. So, all right. Well, let me start this talk about birds as bioindicators, and I think that oops, let me it's not letting me actually control the screen here.
Hmm.
Let's
Are
see.
you, is he a co-host, Miriam?
I am.
Okay.
You can start sharing. It is not letting me advance my slide.
Hmm.
Let me reshare it, see if that will make any difference. Sorry about the delay.
No problem. I'll use this as a chance to say something I should have mentioned earlier. If you have any questions about what he's speaking about, you could put your questions in the chat, and at the end of his presentation, we'll go over them with him.
And also, let me just say that I'm the sort of person who does not mind being interrupted.
Okay.
I have no qualms about that whatsoever. So yeah, let me start by going back, a bit more than a century when coal miners were actually using live birds, living birds, as their in-hand personal bioindicators. It was important for those miners in the day when there were not many occupational safety and health, concerns for these hardworking men, mostly men, I suppose. So they had these canaries, which actually would show signs of becoming ill from the coal gases that occasionally accumulated. And it gave the miners a bit of a head start on getting out of these mine passages that were becoming polluted with these toxic gases. And this was their literal lifeline. So they cared for their canaries in the coal mine because their lives depended on it. And I would argue that while it's maybe not as much of a one-to-one relationship of a bird and one of us having our life depend on that, that the how birds are doing generally still has a great deal of bearing on the well-being of all of us. At the National Aviary, we actually have an entire exhibit hall that is called Canaries Call, and that's specifically because it messages all about the ways that birds are affected by human impacts on the environment and tells the story of why it's important for us to pay attention to these things. For those of you who may not know about the National Aviary, it's on Pittsburgh's north side, which is near the stadiums, across from the point, and it is rather close, about 15 miles from where Rachel Carson grew up in Springdale, Pennsylvania, and that was up the Allegheny River from the National Aviary. And Rachel Carson, of course, we all recognize as a champion of the environmental movement. A lot of her interest in the environment grew out of her interest in birds as well as in marine life. This is a great picture of her at Hawk Mountain Sanctuary, and it turns out that among the many things that she pondered when she was working on her book, which I hope everybody knows about if they, or at least if they haven't read it. Um, she was paying attention to what was going on in this time, the early 60s, when the use of DDT as a pesticide was absolutely widespread and without any concern for the health of anything. In fact, people were spraying this material in their homes over in their nurseries where their babies were sleeping. It was really supposed to be this amazing, innovation that humans had created that killed all unwanted insects, especially mosquitoes. But of course, we went headlong into it before we had any understanding of what the long-term impacts would be. But Rachel Carson did the research, and she wrote a book that was importantly not written for scientists as much as it was for the general public, and yet she spoke about the problem with the clear belief that the general public could, in fact, understand and appreciate the underlying science that was in her. That was a big part of her message. And the main message that she had was that when you have these pesticides and other poisons in the environment, not infrequently there is bioaccumulation of that chemical up the food chain, which means that while the concentration of those toxins might be very small, maybe arguably vanishingly small, for example, in the water column, by the time it works its way up through the food chain, the zooplankton, the small fish, the large fish, and finally the bald eagle, the concentration of that pesticide in the predator bird is 7 magnitudes of order greater than it was in the water. So saying it's in low concentrations in the water is not should not cause complacency about these toxins, because many of them do this bioaccumulation up the food chain throughout the ecosystem. Following the publication of her book, and I think we have to credit Rachel Carson as the individual most responsible for the environmental movement as we know it through the 1970s and to the present day. We had a lot of important things happen, but notice, even though we had these things happen, it was still 10 years after the publication of her book before DDT was actually banned. But nevertheless, had she not made the studies that she did and created a very good document that explained everything clearly and gotten all that public support, that we might never have seen it get banned in I'm talking about me in my lifetime. So it's still very important. Lots of other things happened. There was a general environmental movement there. The first Earth Day and Endangered Species Act, Clean Air Act, and all kinds of things happened. And again, I think the genesis of a great deal of this was Rachel Carson's Silent Spring. And, when you think about what happened just to bald eagles, you talk about bioindicators. Well, the numbers went down precipitously across the country, across the continent, down to, and this is from Hawk Mountain, they went to a bottomed out at 14 eagles counted at Hawk Mountain in 1972, right before the DDT ban could have had any positive effect. But notice that the DDT, or that the Hawk Mountain data shows the recovery was steady. And this is not just for bald eagle. This was also for osprey, for peregrine falcons, and for a whole host of other raptors that had similar population drops during the heavy DDT era, which is post-World War II, until it was banned in 1972. Sadly, things are not okay for bald eagles or for all of birds in our world, because birds are showing us through the effects that they show that we have done other things to the environment that still remain as problems that need to be addressed. And I don't think much sadder than the appearance of a bald eagle that is suffering from lead poisoning. And wildlife rehabbers do everything in their power to try to use chelation techniques to save the lives of these birds. But in the end, so many of them die. And here is shown 58 dead bald eagles being looked at by U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service personnel. And you'll notice that a great many of them are adults. So these are birds of breeding age, not young birds. And when we see things like this, when we see birds suffering in some way that is connected to a human cause, an anthropogenic cause, we need to pay attention to it. We need to do the studies so that we know how to correct the problem. But that's not just for the sake of the birds themselves, but for our own. Because again, something that's this bad for birds is clearly also bad for us, either directly or indirectly. That's a bit of a downer. So I really want to talk about something that I'm doing and have done and am continuing to do in my role as ornithologist at the National Aviary that actually began when I was a field biologist at Powder Mill Nature Reserve through the early 80s and into about 2000. I began a study of the Louisiana water thrush, which I think most birders know that bird pretty well. It's generally a bird that people do like to see because it's a habitat specialist, so they tend to be found only on forested headwater streams. You're not going to tend to see them in a mixed flock of warblers in a tree at the park or in your front or backyard. So it's a bit of a special bird in a lot of ways. I certainly think it's very special because I love the habitat it's in. I love its song, and I've devoted 30 years of my life to studying it. But initially, my focus on this bird was not because of its potential to be a bioindicator. Interestingly, my first reason for studying this bird was simply to do an in-depth study of a bird that was in that neotropical migrant group of birds that were undergoing broad declines from the late beginning in the 70s and throughout the 80s and into the 90s. And I just sort of wanted to understand beyond the bird banding studies that we did at Powder Mill, where we were mostly looking at migrants, I wanted to understand the breeding biology of essentially a model species, a model neotropical migrant, and I chose the Louisiana water thrush because at Powder Mill, Powder Mill Nature Reserve is named for Powder Mill Run, which is one of two headwater streams. So I knew where on Powder Mill I could find this bird. And I felt like it would be a very worthwhile species to study. I only found out once I had decided to study it that one of the two streams that is present on the Powder Mill Biological Station is actually acidified from acid mine drainage. So these two streams are side by side at Powder Mill. Initially, I was just going to study the Louisiana water thrush as a neotropical migrant, and I assumed I had two sites on Powder Mill where I could find their nests and band them and monitor their survival and productivity. But I found out that one of those streams was very much impaired compared to the other one with very low pH. And so this sort of changed the focus of my study. Now I was interested in if these two streams are so different in their water chemistry, but otherwise look quite similar, being forested headwater streams, in a contiguous forest, not highly developed in either case, how would this affect a bird that lives in riparian habitats and depends on that habitat for its food? So that's what launched my study. And within a year of my study, the local watershed association actually got funding to install a passive treatment system for the abandoned acid mine drainage that was polluting Laurel Run. This is called a successive alkalinity producing system. It goes by the abbreviation SAPS. And so they installed this SAPS, and here's how it works. They can test the influent, that is the drainage coming out of the old mine had a pH of 3, which is highly acidic, and the acidity measured 514 parts per million. It had 0 alkalinity, meaning the water coming out of there had no buffering capacity whatsoever. And the dissolved aluminum was 25.6 parts per million, which is very, very dangerous for aquatic life. But after the water had gone through this series of ponds that were constructed, they used mushroom manure, they used aquatic plants, and basically had a slow transit time through these series of ponds. And when the water left the ponds and flowed down into Laurel Run, the pH was close to 7. All the acidity was gone, and as the name suggests, it had actually produced alkalinity, successive alkalinity producing systems, SAPs, and the aluminum had dropped down to levels safe for aquatic life. So the whole point of my study was to see how the birds might serve as a bioindicator of the bad conditions originally, and then of the improving conditions following the measures that were taken. One of the things that confounded my study is the fact that, in addition to mine drainage, throughout the Northeast there is what we know as acid rain, or wet acid deposition, and you can see from this map that it's the highest anywhere, very close to southwestern Pennsylvania, and it's indeed highest in the same areas which are near the high concentration of Louisiana water thrushes as breeding birds in North America. So, because of this risk of water thrushes to acid pollution, some colleagues and I got together in the late 90s, and we submitted a grant proposal to the EPA for ecological assessment and indicators research. And the title is lengthy: Using Bioindicators to Develop a Calibrated Index of Regional Ecological Integrity for Forested Headwater Streams. My colleagues who worked with me on this were Rob Brooks out of the Penn State Cooperative Wetland Center, Terry Master, a professor at East Stroudsburg University, and several other folks, Tim O'Connell and a few others involved over the years. This was a 3-year study, and during those 3 years, I had a large study area in the Laurel Highlands of southwestern Pennsylvania, and I picked study sites that represented 3 streams that were predetermined to be acidic based on testing of the water. So Lynn Run, Laurel Run, and Gary's Run, and then also Jonathan Run down by Ohiopyle. Then I picked matching streams, so to speak, so to compare them to. So I had 4 good and 4 not good streams as part of this 3-year study funded by the Environmental Protection Agency. And just to show you how these stacked up, just based on chemical differences, not on the biological differences, you can see that the pH was uniformly low on the acidified streams. All of them had measurable acidity, and one had no measurable alkalinity, and all of the rest had very low measurable alkalinity. And the amount of aluminum, dissolved aluminum, was higher than the reference streams, up to 70 times higher. But a couple of them had lower than expected. But all of them had issues relative to their suitability for nesting water thrushes. So we proceeded with this comparison, and when you have this intent to do a study, you have to create a framework for that study. And the hypothesis that overarched this study was simply that the streams that are polluted by acidic rain or acid mine drainage represent lower quality habitat for Louisiana water thrushes. And this is primarily because we know from other work that acid pollution negatively impacts macroinvertebrate survival in streams, and we knew from previous work that water thrushes are primarily feeding on aquatic macroinvertebrates. So that's sort of the umbrella under which we did our study. And if you look at a water thrush, and you look at a stream and you flip a rock over, you see a variety of things that look like this, and they fall in the group of either mayflies, stoneflies, or caddisflies. And in biological and in conservation work and in environmental work, these are grouped as EPT. That's for the first letters of the order of insects that they belong to: Ephemeroptera, Plecoptera, and Trichoptera. And of those three, EPT, the group that is most sensitive to acidification is the Ephemeroptera. In the Plecoptera and Trichoptera, there are some taxa, that is, some species that actually are fairly tolerant of acidification. But overall, EPT is going to be higher in a stream that has higher water quality and lower in a stream that has lower water quality. So in and up by themselves, these insects are a good bioindicator. But we were interested to find out if the bird could tell us everything that the insects are telling us, because sampling or collecting information about birds, bird presence, is a bit less expensive and time consuming than taking insect samples and getting them all identified. So imagine a water thrush on a stream unimpacted by acid pollution, and when they look in under, on the rocks, under the leaf, the submerged leaf pads, under the wet logs and things, they can find all manner of insects. This represents a wide diversity of aquatic life that a water thrush might be able to pick and choose from when it's trying to find out, what it wants to eat or what it wants to carry back to its nest to feed its young. When you have acidification, a couple things can happen. The first thing we know happens is that we have a reduction in diversity. We know we lose the Ephemeroptera, or that is the mayflies. But we might potentially still have a lot of organisms, just not as many different kinds of organisms. But the other possibility is that we not only lose diversity, but we actually lose abundance. So when you have this acid impact, it may be the case that you have fewer kinds and just plain fewer insects for water thrushes to feed on. One thing that confounds this is the possibility that of the couple of kinds that can survive it, and the couple of kinds that survive it, they may be abundant, may not be very abundant, but they may be very large, which means that the bird may have plenty to eat, because one of these things might equal, 20 mayfly larvae, for example. So getting into the study, the first thing that we did was to actually go to the insects themselves. We measured using a Serber sampler. We took samples from these two streams, and we counted the individuals. We enumerated what taxa they belonged to, and we weighed them. And in fact, found out that Powdermill and Laurel Run differed in all of the ways. Laurel Run had fewer taxa, fewer species or genera that we could, whatever we could identify to, had a lower number of individuals per unit area, and a lower biomass or dry weight. So in every way that you could measure, all the ways that we thought could happen, we now knew that Laurel Run should be a poorer habitat for Louisiana water thrushes. So, and let me just show you in these pie graphs how dramatic this is. So the Ephemeroptera is the light blue, and that big medium blue piece is all of the stoneflies, but it entirely is comprised of two groups called Leuctra and Amphinomora. So these are two acid. I'm sorry, the purple is the acid-tolerant stoneflies, and the pink is all other stonefly species. So in any event, on Laurel Run, we have these over all these years of the study, except 98, 99, 2000, we had essentially no mayflies, and this large community of insects, these stoneflies that are acid tolerant. These they're actually called winter stoneflies. They're quite small and probably not very nutritious. And just for comparison, here's Powdermill Run. And here's the way their samples looked. They're dominated by mayflies. And you can see that the piece that relates to those two groups of stoneflies that are so common in the acid polluted stream are very small component of the community on the unimpacted stream, Powdermill Run. So as biologists, we think, well, what are the ways that this difference that we now know exists between these two streams? What are the ways that it might affect the birds, and what do we have to do to measure if those effects are happening? So one way is to think that about territorial behavior, that the water thrushes might sort of know that the stream is not as good just because they're foraging for themselves, and they might establish territories. Um, I'm sorry, that fewer water that they might establish territories on those acid streams, but that they would be fewer territories that because the streams would not support as many water thrushes. And furthermore, while a male might make a territory there, he might be unsuccessful in attracting a mate if the habitat quality is judged to be low. Um, the only way you can get at how many water thrushes are on a stream is to mark them and mark them in a way that is unique, that can be seen without having the bird in hand. So we would catch the birds and band them with a serial numbered band, but then also add colored leg bands so that we could see these birds moving about the habitat subsequent to the banding. And when we do this, we're able to actually count how many territories there are on the stream and actually demarcate those territories. Importantly, on after we did all this, we found that not only were the territory numbers much greater on equal lengths of stream between Powdermill and Laurel, but that the pairing success of water thrushes on Powdermill was much higher, almost 100% compared to Laurel. So we're already seeing some of the differences that we predicted that support the hypothesis that we had. This graphic shows the nests that we found, and we tried to find every nest of every pair throughout each season. And as you see this thing populate, you'll notice that it was not terribly hard to find nests on Powdermill Run, but it was rather more challenging to find nests on Laurel Run. And the thing to notice before I go to the next slide is that on Laurel Run, there are little pieces. If you see where my cursor is, you can see these little inputs, these little tributaries coming into this small headwater stream that actually are not acidic. So it actually has some pH neutral spring-fed seeps coming into the Laurel Run, and you'll notice that all of the nests that we found for water thrushes on Laurel Run have these purple color-coded waters that are flowing into the acidified stream close to the nesting territory. Powdermill Run, since it's uniformly good quality up and down, had water thrushes packed stem to stern. We did some other things. We thought, well, if the water thrushes nesting on acid streams have much lower amount of food in the stream to feed their young, maybe they would have to search for longer periods of time to find enough food to deliver to their nestlings. So to do that, I hired some students who sat in hides that we made, and they watched nests, and they literally counted every feeding trip that the water thrush adults came, and they not only counted every feeding trip and every time the adult removed fecal sacs from the young, they also tried to identify what was in the adult's beak as it was bringing the food to the nest. It turned out that at one measure, just the amount of feeding, the feeding rate was not surprisingly was not very different between the green or pH neutral streams and the red or acidic stream, Laurel Run. They were able apparently to make similar feeding trips to their young regardless of the water quality. And that was initially a little confusing, but we thought, well, one of the reasons that might be the case is if they're not strictly focusing on aquatic prey, but maybe they're adapting a little bit and taking some terrestrial or other novel prey and bringing that to their nestlings. Turns out that that's one of the ways that they're doing this. In this graph, you'll see that we observed salamanders being fed to nestlings, in a much higher proportion, almost half of the feeding trips, of the feeding bouts, not each feeding trip, but feeding bouts contained a salamander, and similarly, almost half of those trips contained obviously terrestrial invertebrates, for example, hairy caterpillars. So that says to us that the water thrushes definitely are feeling the impacts, but they're able to make the best of a bad situation. And if you doubt that water thrushes can eat salamanders, and indeed it wasn't known that they did, it's one of the few songbirds that preys on a vertebrate. This is one of our salamanders feeding one of our salamanders, one of our water thrushes feeding a salamander, a gigantic salamander to its young. And we watched this on several occasions. One of the other ways that we suspected they were managing to find food and make the same number of feeding trips to their young was that they were actually not constraining their foraging to the stream itself, but they were spending time foraging on peripheral, unpolluted wetland sites, similar to those little purple pieces I showed you in the previous slide. And we didn't have any fancy technology at this time. We didn't have little devices that allowed us to follow the adults wherever they went. We didn't have telemetry. We didn't have satellite tags or anything like that. So I used a very sensible means, I thought, which is that the birds would have to poop roughly where they're finding their food. So I figured it goes in one end, it comes out the other. See, I've got a master's degree. I know stuff like that. And so I had my field assistants actually look for the what we called water thrush splay on all the different segments of the stream and the side streams. And they did this, and it all basically proved that in the end, the water thrushes that were feeding on acidified or were living on acidified streams were finding foraging heavily on the peripheral sites. That is, they were actually able, although they were nesting on an acidic stream, to find to prospect for food on all of the pH neutral stream springs and streams that they could find within their larger territories. So they were actually able to compensate for the lower quality of their habitat. But remember, only about a third as many of water thrushes were actually nesting on the acid impacted stream. So those birds were doing as well as they could do, but the stream could not support the numbers or the density of breeding water thrushes that circumneutral or pH neutral stream could. Subsequent to this work, which was published, we've drilled in and used things like DNA to actually elucidate the diet, and by using molecular analysis of the nestling diet. And this is by collecting the fecal sacs. In the middle picture, there's a little wet blob of a thing, which is what a baby bird does when it's excreting the waste. It's packaged in what's like a disposable diaper sort of thing, so that the adult can actually pick it up and carry it away. And you may have seen this. You may have seen this with your grackles and robins in your neighborhood, because all songbirds have these fecal sacs to aid the adults in removing the fecal matter from the nest. In any event, those were analyzed using molecular analysis, and it supported the idea that water thrushes on the acid impacted streams were in fact feeding on terrestrial animals much more than aquatic animals. So this is kind of an interesting picture, because this water thrush has a beak absolutely chock full of big mayflies. And you can see he's got a band, he was green over white on his left leg. I know this bird, and he was on one of my acid streams. So it serves to prove that this bird had to fly or commute a considerable distance to find a place where he could get a beak full of mayflies. It also lets us know that mayflies are really important nutritionally to the development of water thrush nestlings. So for a summary, the reduced aquatic insect diversity, abundance, and amount due to acidification definitely affected the water thrush density. So they are about a third as many could nest on a given length of stream compared to a pH neutral stream. But the birds that were on those acid streams were mitigating the adverse effects of the acid pollution's effect on the macroinvertebrates by changing their foraging behavior, feeding on novel prey, and finding peripheral foraging sites that had higher quality water and therefore more of the kinds of food that they wanted to feed their young. So what this means is that LOA's LOA presence on acidified streams indicates and literally tells you that there's good water quality inputs within that watershed. So you could actually map those where those splay deposits were heavy. You could go in with a chemistry kit and check the water pH, but I can tell you that the water is pH 7 simply because of the water thrush foraging in there heavily and leaving the droppings on the rock. So I've used this in streams that I've never visited before, and I can walk in now and practically, by counting water thrush droppings, I can tell you the quality of the stream within walking a couple hundred feet of any stream anywhere in the range of Louisiana water thrushes. All of this has been published in peer-reviewed journals, which is really important. The only way that we learn about things like this, that the value of a bird as a reliable indicator of environmental conditions, is by doing the studies, which often take years and take an awful lot of data. And then it has to be published. It has to be peer-reviewed published, so that it can be accepted as being honest information, reliable information. So this is the one, Effects of Acidification on the Breeding Ecology of a Stream-Dependent Songbird, that summarizes most of our findings. We've had a great many other other publications that have happened connected to this study. We saw the first case of double brooding in Louisiana water thrushes. We saw the first case of polygyny in Louisiana water thrushes, and so forth. And we published on all of that. But importantly, I and my colleague Terry Master co-authored the Birds of the World account. If you used to get the Birds of North America, and now it's the Birds of the World, we're the authors of the Louisiana water thrush account. So we've helped that, and we've also written works for the popular literature, including this article in Birding Magazine, which is What Water Thrushes Teach Us. So the story about the water thrushes got put out to birders as well. But the thing I'm most proud of is that the water thrush is now in the state of Pennsylvania considered a species of conservation concern, and it has been determined to be an indicator of water quality and high quality riparian forest in the state of Pennsylvania. And once you get that designation, it becomes, you get much more leverage with this bird, and with the studies of this bird and with surveys of this bird throughout the state. And in the Pennsylvania, it's listed as what we call a responsibility species and also an indicator of high quality riparian habitat. All of this could only happen because we did the work, we did the studies, and we did those studies, by the way, I didn't mention it, but we studied them in the area around Powder Mill in southwestern Pennsylvania. We studied them near State College in Center County, Pennsylvania, and another colleague studied them in the Poconos out of East Stroudsburg University near the Delaware Water Gap. So this EPA-funded study covered a wide area. Based on our collective studies, the National Park Service even chose the Louisiana water thrush as one of its so-called vital signs. They have vital signs that are, a few of them are biotic and some of them are abiotic, meaning things like chemistry measures. But it basically tells them whether the streams of national parks in the eastern U.S. have high ecological integrity or not, based on whether or not they have Louisiana water thrushes. And so once you have all of the underlying research that's been done to show that the water thrush does reflect water quality, now other groups, be they the National Park Service or the state of Pennsylvania or local watershed groups, can all use this information in applying management for streams. So what else can the water thrush tell us? Does it end with this story of the impacts of acidification, or might there be more that it can tell us? Well, I was had some colleagues from up in Maine at the Biodiversity Research Institute. While I was studying water thrush and acidity, they wanted to study the effect of mercury in terrestrial ecosystems in the Northeast. And these young women came down. A colleague of mine, David Evers, from up at the Biodiversity Research Institute, knew we banded a lot of birds at Powder Mill. He wanted to take blood samples in order to test for mercury levels. And I, of course, was very interested in him doing that, especially for Louisiana water thrushes. They did do that, and in their final report, the water thrush is listed as having uh, uh, a certain level of risk for mercury pollution, and it is listed as an indicator species for mercury pollution on streams and rivers. Since we published the EPA study, of course, the shale gas boom has happened, and so here we're looking at this is an old slide, but the outline is the Marcellus Shale formation. I'm sure there are many more wells drilled by now, but that's what I had. And I wanted to show you how, when you look at the map of one of the early breeding bird atlas, or second breeding bird atlas map, where the water thrushes are, you can see that a big portion of their range in Pennsylvania is actually falls within this Marcellus Shale formation, which raises the possibility that they are going to be impacted by the extraction of shale gas, both from all these losses, habitat loss, habitat fragmentation, noise, etc. But especially perhaps from the uniquely from the fracking, which is the means by which they break the shale with high pressure water and chemicals and sands jetted down down into the water table. Steve Latta is the director of conservation and field research. That's the department I work for at the National Aviary. When he came to the National Aviary, he was looking for a good study subject, and I, of course, pointed him immediately to Louisiana water thrush. And he has taken up the mantle and has done a lot of work to help us to better understand what else the water thrush can tell us, and specifically impacts of energy development. And he was able to show that the water thrush, similar to the way that it is a sensitive bioindicator of acidification, it also is a very good indicator of the presence of fracking within watersheds. In the reason this is interesting is because the fracking industry will tell their public voice is that all of the water that is injected down into these wells is recovered, and so it can't migrate up from thousands of feet underground up into the surface flowing waters. And Steve and his colleagues at Duquesne University used an intriguing method for asking the question of whether that was true or not, in that they looked at levels of chemicals, and specifically strontium and barium, in feathers of water thrushes. And you can see that the strontium and barium concentrations are much, much higher in frack water compared to the surface flowing waters in the average river or stream. And indeed, he found that the water thrushes that were in frack watersheds had significantly elevated levels of strontium and barium. So we've learned over 20 plus years of study that where clean water rushes, there are water thrushes, and lots of them, and they do well, and they're productive, and they survive well. I'd like that to be the end of the story, but it's not. We have to go on because human beings never seem to run out of ways to foul the environment. So we have now pivoted, and we're now looking at the problem of microplastic pollution. We know from studies that others have done that microplastics are are penetrating just about every ecosystem on planet Earth, from the deepest ocean abysses to the highest mountains. And in this one study, they could even show that the caddisflies, which collect material from their environment to create essentially a casing, a protective casing, when they're in the water, feeding to grow to eventually develop into an adult caddisfly and become airborne. Those casings were showing increasing amounts of microplastics, over the years, as we have contributed to increasing amounts of plastic pollution. And the big question is, what is the effect of this on birds, let alone on us? We know there are effects on us, certainly. I highlighted some portions of this talk that investigated. It was a 30-year review of plastic pollution. And sorry, I'm trying to get rid of just one thing here. Hang on, it's not going to let me. Anyway, it identified a gap, saying that we didn't know how much plastics were a problem basically in terrestrial environments, and that we didn't know how much it was important to free living terrestrial birds. So this has guided our latest study, which is to investigate microplastics. And since microplastics are adsorbed, rather they attract PFAS chemicals, and PFAS are those forever chemicals that you may have heard about in the headlines recently. They essentially glom onto the plastics, and then since the plastics themselves are consumed by caddisflies or find their way into the casing, then a water thrush eating it is bound to be exposed to some amount of plastic, and therefore PFAS as well. I don't know if some of you heard, but just in the last few weeks, there was an Allegheny Front NPR story about alarming levels of PFAS in Montour Run from the Pittsburgh area. So we started. We found out this more study shows that the microplastics and the PFAS is a problem. It's like a synergistic relationship that combines to create more toxic exposure to aquatic animals in aquatic environments. Let me just say that these forever chemicals, these per and polyfluoroalkyl alkyl substances, are a serious environmental problem for birds everywhere, but especially those that forage in aquatic environments. So certainly in shorebirds. The top part of this slide shows elevated liver levels of these chemicals in shorebirds and also in shellfish that they eat. And the middle picture shows sort of the pathway by which shorebirds can be accumulating these things. And you can't help thinking that this certainly is affecting Presque Isle's own piping plover population. So we need to. Certain birds have served as bioindicators to tell us that there's a problem out there. It's our job now to be as smart as the coal miners who knew that they should get out of the mine when the bird gave them that bit of information, and furthermore to not go back in until it was safe to. We need to have the same mindset. It's that canary in a coal mine mindset is as much as important for today as it was for miners. So we were able to get a grant to start a study assessing food web transfer of plastic pollution in the Louisiana water thrush. We're working with Brady Porter at Duquesne University. He and his students have the laboratory equipment that can help us answer the questions that we have from the data we're collecting in the field, because much of this study is going to be laboratory based in order to get at some of the answers. And this is some of the students that we worked with. One of them, Ramon Childs. Ray is getting his graduate degree on this study, on this very question of microplastics and Louisiana water thrushes. And this was from the crew of us out on one of our streams this past summer in 2025. And here are the sites around Pittsburgh. And you can see that one of those sites, if you look over in the list of sites, one of them is Montour Run. So so I which is the one that's been in the headlines right now. These data, we don't have the results. I checked up until earlier today to see if there was anything that those guys could send me yet that I could share with you, but we don't have those analyses done yet. If you're interested in the kind of work, and a lot of our work in the Department of Conservation and Field Research is this sort of bioindicator work with birds. If you're interested in this and other conservation work that the National Aviary does, I want to point you to Flight Paths, which is our newsletter for conservation work. And you can find it on the aviary.org website under the conservation tab. So go to conservation and find, you'll see there's a separate link for Flight Paths. And you can see all of the past Flight Paths issues, at least those of recent years. Here's the current one, which actually tells the story of the new National Aviary S. Kent Rockwell Conservation Center that is being created as we speak up in Fox Chapel area for the work moving forward. I also want to call attention to the fact that I do lead bird walks for the National Aviary, including to Presque Isle. That's coming up in May. And we go to Cook Forest, and going to Powder Mill and so forth. If you're interested in that, you want to grab a quick shot of that, it'll take you to the site to register for those. We also do a lot of kayak birding trips at North Park Lake, which are a lot of fun. So you're more than happy to have more folks coming along on those things. And with that, the Goose is going to thank you kindly for your attention and invite you to ask me any questions you may have. This is my email address and my cell phone number. You're welcome to text or call me about birds. And if you have questions about what I've said tonight, I'm happy to try to answer them now, and you can feel free to contact me later.
Thank you, Bob. That was wonderful. It's really fascinating information. I have a quick question myself, if everybody else doesn't mind.
Of course.
Let me ask it. Has there been any comparison done between the nestling health and fledging success between, those that were fed proportionally more, of those acidic invertebrates?
Yep. So we haven't drilled into that as far as we could, but there's definitely been there is lower growth rates in the nestlings on acidic streams. So we haven't done blood work or lab work to really find out what might be contributing to that. But I can tell you that in addition to having lower density of nests, the nestlings were smaller in the nests that were on these acid streams, and we suspect that their survival of those fledglings was lower than for unimpacted streams. There's a lot of work to be done. This is the kind of thing that, even though we've got 30 years now, right? With 1996 is when my first field season, I think. Going back to that slide, and from then until now, we've got 30 years of data, and we still have unanswered questions, and that's the nature of the beast. But if you want to have knowledge of how the natural systems and animals and plants are being affected by what we human beings are doing in the world, these studies are absolutely essential. No one's going to necessarily believe you about anything until you've got data that you can show, and then especially when those data support statistical conclusions that have been peer reviewed and published in scientific journals. Now you can talk to the people who are in charge of managing those habitats, whether it's a state or a federal entity or not. So, I just want to make the point that I think intuitively, Rachel Carson knew that these things that were being said about robins dying and the declining number of bald eagles at Hawk Mountain, she intuitively knew that was a signal, right? and she drilled in and kind of put the pieces of the puzzle together. But who's doing that today? And we've magnitudes of order more stuff that we've invented, synthesized as chemicals, have been put out in the environment in volumes that vastly exceed what was out there in Rachel Carson's day. So we need the students and the upcoming students of biology to do this work, because we need that canary in the coal mine. We need that signal that, oops, we're tilting things too far. A correction needs to be made. So that's why I think birds as bioindicators are absolutely critical. And of course, most people in this talk know, if you're birders, maybe you submit to eBird, maybe you do Christmas bird counts, maybe you're helping with the third Pennsylvania Breeding Bird Atlas. All of those data, all of those community source data, all also have value for detecting trends that are essentially collectively serving as a bioindicator.
Absolutely. Here. For myself, I can say that when we were working out of Pittsburgh during COVID, once the traffic pollution stopped, all of a sudden you could hear blue. What was it? Indigo Bunting was singing right at the Steel Plaza at some point.
Yeah.
So that being said, there are a couple of questions in the chat. Carolyn was asking, did these birds die in a single incident? Carolyn, did you mean all those bald eagles probably?
Yes.
Oh,
Yes, I
uh,
meant bald eagles.
yeah. You know what? I don't think so. I think that was over a period. I don't think it was from a very long period of time. I think it was maybe from collected from over a wide area in the course of a year or so. But the whatever region of the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and their regions are large, where they have biologists would go in, and of course they keep all that in case they need to, whether any lawsuits involved or any legal action that needs to be taken. So all that material would be kept and then analyzed for the purpose of ultimately of protecting bald eagles. And of course, that's a whole separate issue. That's lead shot in the environment. That's the need to replace lead shot with steel shot or other shot that's not toxic. I mean, we don't use lead-based paint to paint our homes anymore because we know how toxic it is. We don't put leaded gasoline in our cars because we know how toxic it is. Why then do hunters continue to shoot lead out into the environment when we know for a fact that if it's consumed by any wildlife, even in tiny trace amounts, it's going to be lethal? I mean, that seems like a no-brainer, right? And I'm sure we'll get there, but a lot of damage has been done and will be done until we do finally get to the point when it's not something we would ever consider doing.
Also, Carolyn was asking if you could share a photo of Louisiana water thrush fecal splay, but I think that already happened, right? There was a photo.
Of a what? Of a fecal? Which photo?
Carolyn?
You said that you could hunt along a stream and find a fecal spray.
A splay. Yeah,
Splay.
like a fecal, like a dropping. Yeah. So let me tell you a quick funny story. I went down. I've studied this bird in Costa Rica as well because it migrates and spends its time in Latin America in the winter. In my first trip down to Costa Rica, I drove a car along the back roads in the mountains, and I saw where the stream crossed, and I parked my car and I got out and I walked up the stream, and I saw a dropping on a rock, and I said to my colleague, I said, "They're here." And I walked up about 50 more feet, and my first Costa Rica water thrush flew up. And not only do I know that it's a water thrush from its size and shape, but also I'm like a tracker. I can look at it and say that that dropping just got put there like minutes ago, and that kind of thing. And I tease about it, but I've gotten pretty good at it. And I sort of understand from having been on streams for so many hundreds and thousands of hours that when you have a water thrush that's feeding actively in a stream, there's a certain density of these droppings which are very conspicuous. I think they actually deposit them on tops of rocks and logs in order to claim the territory. I think it's a visual sign to other water thrushes that this is an occupied territory, frankly. But in any event, next time you're in a stream in early April when they're back, when they're just getting back, through May, look for these sort of pear-shaped, like this, like pear-shaped viscous droppings, not a splat. You know how when you think of a classic bird dropping, it has
Right.
like a crown, well, these aren't dropped from a bird perched above on a branch and having it splat on the rock. The bird is sitting on the rock and it just drops it right there. So there's no splat. It's this very pear-shaped, it's complete, and it's very viscous. I tease my field assistants, my young field assistants, who say, "Well, how can you know it's a water thrush?" I said, "Well, you taste it." And they all cringe. And anyway, you don't do that. But I've watched more water thrushes, defecate, and I've gone and inspected the dropping. I know my water thrush poop when I see it. So, and you can too.
Frida wanted to know, is there an equivalent bird that is a reliable indicator in Erie area streams?
They're here.
Well, water thrushes would be in Erie. Yeah,
Yeah.
any stream that has a steep gradient, a steep enough gradient to have some water flow would have Louisiana water thrushes in it. I will tell you that we did embark on a study that we did not get funding for, but we still may in the future. But we wanted to look at because water thrushes are headwater streams. Those are the smallest streams. And then when two headwater streams join, you get a bigger stream. And when two bigger streams join, you get an even bigger stream. And this is called stream order. So water thrushes streams are like first order, second order. And then like a river is like a sixth or seventh order. So we were interested in, could you look at things like bald eagles, great blue herons, common mergansers, belted kingfishers, and work your way up the watershed and find out if you had bioindicator kind of potential for all of those birds, specifically as it relates to water quality. So that would be interesting to do. It's a huge study. I'm not getting any younger. I would need to hire a huge number of people to accomplish something like that. But in answer to the question, yeah, I think that any bird that is tied to an aquatic habitat is probably a potential bioindicator of the water quality in that habitat. And that's not just streams and rivers, but also lakes and even marshes. So yeah.
Thank you. Also, Frida wanted to know if National Aviary is controlled by federal funding or regulations.
No, not at all. National is strictly an honorary designation. Our local congressman, submitted a bill to name us the National Aviary at the time. This was in the early '90s. We were sort of the biggest and best example of an all bird zoo in the United States, and we got that honorary designation that comes with absolutely no funding, no federal funding. All of our funding is from members and the local philanthropic community, and if and we do try to get grants from the state or from federal agencies when we can, but it's all
probably a good
none of it is federal.
Elizabeth Miller wanted to know, may I use screenshots from your slides for my environmental organization's Facebook page?
Yes, you may. Maybe if you can email me and show me which one it is, just so it's not one that maybe I took from a. If it's one that I have that's representing my work, it's a definite yes. If it's one that might be showing some other material, maybe I'll point you to the source where I got it.
All right. Before I go back to thank yous, let's see if there are any more. So Laura shared, one of my spark birds is the evening grosbeak, and when I was a kid in Clinton County, we had large flocks all winter long. In the last 10 years, I've only seen one. Their decline has to be partially attributable to humans.
Yeah, right. And I can tell you that I've had the same experience when I was at Powder Mill. We did bird banding, and we did winter bird banding, and we would catch hundreds of evening grosbeaks, and it was it was a lot of fun, and it was at times quite painful, but we did it and we enjoyed it. And through maybe the 80s, and then after that, it just fewer and fewer, and then none. And I don't know. I think they've had a few little blips, some winters where they've gotten some, but basically they're gone. And they had been in every winter. They had started out in the 60s for Bob Leverman as a sort of an eruptive species that would come every couple or 3 years, and then it was every year, and now it's essentially never. I do know that there's some study going on. Colleagues of mine, Nick Liadis, and David Yaney. Nick is from Bird Lab. He's a nonprofit that he created, and David Yaney is from the Western Pennsylvania Conservancy, and they are doing studies where they're tracking evening grosbeaks. And I know they're traveling up to Clarion County, where David Yaney's parents live, and do still have grosbeaks sometimes, and they've been doing some good research into it to try to understand what might be underlying the cause. It seems to be a continent-wide range contraction that kind of parallels the range expansion that happened in the 60s and 70s. They're basically a western mountain bird, and they moved gradually across Canada, became more numerous in the east, and then we started seeing them erupting, and they were a big thrill for everybody around Pittsburgh in the 60s and 70s, where they'd never before been seen. And now they've contracted again. And some theories suggest that it has to do with spruce budworm suppression across Canada, because even though they're big seed eaters at your feeders in winter, they feed their young on spruce budworms and other insects, but especially budworm. They're budworm specialists, like some of the wood warblers are. So that may be what's going on, but there is research happening right now in the Pittsburgh area to try to get to this.
Yeah, it's always a treat to see one in Pittsburgh.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Cindy said super, Bob. Penny said thank you for a great presentation. Laura said thank you. Frida said greatest appreciation for those of you who toil in the slow, careful universe of scientific research.
Yeah.
I think that is very well said. Great presentation,
Thank
Bob.
you.
This is from Gigi, and I'm just reading down. Lori said Tamarack Wildlife is working hard to convince hunting and fishing to choose lead alternatives, and are
Well,
seeing success. But yes, very telling. Amazing ministry to wildlife from your efforts. Thank you. Thank you. Do you work with Tamarack by any chance to gather info
well,
on injuries?
well, I'm a big fan of Tamarack, and I don't know that the aviary has directly worked with them, but I wouldn't be surprised that maybe our veterinary department might have at some point. So I'm going to say, with some reservation, that we probably do work with them. The aviary actually has acquired over the years some rehab birds that were unreleasable, that were judged to be not releasable back to the wild. And the aviary has acquired some of those birds to give them a permanent home for the rest of their life when they couldn't be released back to the wild. So I suspect so, but I certainly know the work of Tamarack very well. And I know that the Pennsylvania Game Commission, I'm pretty sure most eagles that they can get, if they have an issue with an eagle, it goes to Tamarack if they can get it to them.
Cindy is also asking, are you aware of any similar Louisiana water thrush research in Southeast PA or in Lancaster County? I wonder how much agriculture pollutants are affecting the watershed and aquatic organisms.
Yeah, it's a really good question. I am not aware of any research on them in Southeastern PA. I can tell you I have very good colleagues and friends from over at the Stroud Water Research Center. They're aware of my Louisiana water thrush work, and they're doing a lot to protect water quality. And they focus mostly on the macroinvertebrates, that's their expertise. They are aware of the water thrush. I suspect the limitation, as you pointed out, may be that there's insufficient forest there. The Stroud Water Research Center is actually doing reforestation, riparian buffer forests. They're planting them. So who knows? I mean, I would think it would be a very strong indicator that they had successfully sort of turned the page on an impacted stream if their forest grew up and the water quality improved, and they saw water thrushes using it. I think that would be a fantastic story. But I'm not sure I mean, they are sort of a bird of the mountains in the northern parts of Pennsylvania. I'm not sure how common they are in the southeast, but I'm sure they're there. I think I remember on that breeding bird atlas side, I'm sure there were some filled in squares from the second breeding bird atlas down there. So it's a great question, and I think that if they are down in the southeast, there you can be sure that where they are great examples of remaining high quality stream and forest.
Carolyn is also taking advantage of this event to remind everybody or encourage everybody to participate in Third Pennsylvania Bird Atlas.
Yeah.
So, if you can, please do. That is actually a very good cause to participate.
Sure is.
Lori is wondering where to find fracking info, and she's saying it should be shared far and wide to try to deter fracking. Always great to hear about such dedicated work. Thank you. This is from Dallas. And Gary Vargo wanted to know if Mike Fall still at National Aviary?
Yes. Mike
Okay.
Fakes. Mike
Oh,
Fakes.
Fakes. Okay, sorry, I
Yes,
pronounced it.
Faix. Yeah, he sure is.
Okay.
He's our in-house
Well,
photographer and a great bird trainer and educator as well.
yeah.
And when I do these kayak trips, Mike is often my wingman on these kayak birding trips we do on North Park Lake. So, and he
Very
is often
nice.
along on some of these bus trips. Like he's always with me when we go to Cook Forest because he has a camp up in near Cook Forest, so he knows that area really well. He's a very good birder.
Beautiful area. We maybe have another 2 or 3 minutes left, folks. So if you want to
Okay.
unmute yourself and, if any last minute comments, suggestions, questions. If not, then we're going
Yeah,
to
well, listen, thank you for the
say
opportunity
thank
to
you.
speak
Yeah.
to all of you. And please, I invite you all, if you've never been to the National Aviary, make a point to try to get there, in the coming year because it's really a great place. And I think birders especially can enjoy it. When you come to the National Aviary, wear your binoculars into the National Aviary. That's something I always tell folks because we have a lot of birds, and yes, you can see some of them very easily without binoculars. But if you come with binoculars, you'll see a lot more than most of our visitors see, and it's a great deal of fun.
Beautiful place to visit. And Frida, in order to learn about the trips, you can either subscribe to their Facebook page or to visit their website. I can tell you that.
Yep, exactly.
Bob, thank you so much for your time. This was
Oh,
wonderful.
thank you
Yep.
so much. I
I think we
appreciate
learned a
the
lot.
invitation, and I'm looking forward to being up there in May to visit the bird banding station and to do some birding on the peninsula.
Do come visit.
We will.
All right. Thanks everyone for joining. Have a good night.
Good night.